Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you're allowing your faith to shape your politics or are your politics starting to shape your faith. In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orlin Johnson. Let me introduce you to our panelists for today. First, we have with us Ms. Melissa Reed, who is the Director of Government Relations for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We also have with us Dr. Andrew Polk, who's an Associate Professor of History at Middle Tennessee State University and the author of the critically acclaimed book, Faith and Freedom, Propaganda, Presidential Politics, and the Making of an American Religion. We have with us Judith Hawkins, who is a former judge and attorney in Tallahassee, Florida. And we also have with us Mr. Andre Wong, who's the General Counsel and Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the North Pacific Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Ladies and gentlemen, looking forward to our conversation for today. You know, there's a lot of talk regarding what I would call religious nationalism, which some would say is mostly on the right. But Baptists continue to oppose religious nationalism. You know, in the years that were following the ratification of the United States Constitution, there was a very influential Baptist minister by the name of John Leland. And he wrote this quote that said, "The notion of a Christian commonwealth should be exploded forever." Leland today, if he sees where we are 235 years later, his brain may explode with the idea of seeing where we are from a Baptist standpoint, from a Christian standpoint, and the idea that both groups are really looking, in many instances, to quote unquote achieve power. You know, we're trying to figure out how in 2024 that we may have an effort that's in place to try to counter this thinking. You know, the idea that Christian nationalism is something that belongs to the right. However, we have the Southern Baptist Convention that's really involved in a lot of politics as well, which is on the left. You know, Melissa, as you take a look at all of these activities and we find the average individual or Christian or American or just religious person cannot figure out where they should be in this conversation. Can you help us navigate this?
Sure. Well, I really like the Southern Baptist approach to that question, which is neither one, right? We should not be looking to align ourselves with a political position or a political party. Much like the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which I represent, the Baptists have a real legacy of recognizing and respecting the separation of church and state. And so really, they have taken this position and they were affirming that historic position of their faith tradition of saying, no, we do not look to the government to enact or support our religious beliefs. Those should be remain in two separate spheres.
No, it's Andrew, somebody who's been out there and has written a book talking about propaganda and the making almost of an American religion. When you see two groups trying to, one, kind of like show, well, no, I'm not on the wrong side, I'm on the right side, but then society sees them as probably both being on the wrong side. How do we navigate or juxtapose the two positions?
I mean, my suggestion would be to stop pretending there are only two sides in humanity. This is part of our political legacy. And as I've written, I think this was kind of juxtaposed onto American religion in the 1940s and 50s. But this is traditionally Baptist, right? You mentioned Leland, right? Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island, one of the cornerstones of the separation of church and state with Jefferson and Madison in America. This is a consistent thing among Baptists of all the traditions. But we have a tendency to want to put people on the right or the left. I don't think it really works that way in politics in reality, but I know it doesn't work that way in religion. Conservative Christians and liberal Christians, it just doesn't work, right? The Christian faith involves people, human beings. It's just too messy to be strictly ideological or bipartisan. It's about us trying to bring about the world that God had created from the beginning, right? We participate in that, and that gets messy. And our labels make sense. They're simplified. They're easy for us, but they're very rarely accurate. So I was actually surprised, to be honest, and quite pleased the way the Southern Baptist Convention went about this.
If I might tag on to what you just said, Doc, Everybody's trying to create this world based on their vision of what it's supposed to look like. And that's where the rubber hits the road. But I found something quite interesting. There is a website that says Christians Against Christian Nationalists. And as I looked at that, I was impressed with who were not there, what churches, what denominations were not there. And I think that says a lot because the Baptists are very clear and definitive in their position. And I'm thinking that not being on that position almost gives the impression that you're in favor of using the state to further the agenda of religion. And history has proven that that's generally not a good idea.
Well, Andre, I think one of the issues really is that you see these words and you think to yourself, I resemble some of those words. I am a Christian. I am patriotic, and therefore I guess I'm Christian nationalist, or, and I think the problem is you have this nomenclature that's there that actually has a quote unquote definition that's connected to something politically. And now you don't even know what you can call yourself and not worried about being, chased as you go to your local grocery store.
Right. And fundamentally, Christians share common values and principles, but it is also the tone, tenor, and method in which these values are deployed. That is what has these churches concerned. And to Andrew's point, we kind of identify and isolate a left side and a right side, and that there is this homogeneity of viewpoint to each side. He's exactly right. I mean, there is just a diversity, and dare I say, a cacophony of different ideas and viewpoints. And Christian nationalism is a phenomena that's permeating both religion and politics. And I think that's why we're seeing reactions, official reactions by churches in response. We're seeing not only progressive denominations, but mainline denominations that are adopting resolutions and having meetings to address Christian nationalism. So as more denominational groups meet to address this, it'll be interesting to see how some of these mainline groups wrestle or don't wrestle with the growing influence of Christian nationalism.
It's interesting, Orlin. As you know, I'm concerned about the growth of Christian nationalism within our community, within the Christian fellowship. That said, I was really surprised. I was looking at some statistics, and this was from Brookings Institute in 2023, and they noted that only an estimate of 10% of Americans are Christian nationalists, and then an additional 19% are sympathizers, which is, as I said, I absolutely believe that this is something we should be discussing. I see those numbers growing, but I think a lot of times, particularly when it becomes a partisan issue or part of the partisan conversation, we actually fuel, I would say, interest in it and even and maybe perhaps growth of recognizing, oh, well, maybe this is what I should be as well. Again, I absolutely recognize the concern. I have share those concerns myself, but I was just surprised at that low number.
I was just going to say propaganda, public opinion, whatever is constantly fed to the public at some point or another becomes what the public consumes and digests. And it changes thoughts because it's constantly being presented to you. And I'm concerned across the board, if I may say that so much of what's happening in our society is being very subtly introduced into our thought processes. And unless we're really taking the time to think about it, to analyze it, and to push back on it, we will end up in places that we really don't want to go. So now we call it Christian nationalism. But if you take the principles, you could literally remove the word Christian. And I was sitting here trying to think of a good word to put in it, but it's any time the church, wherever we define the church, is relying upon the state to enforce, to further the church's agenda.
But Andrew, I think what's really confusing when you look at the concept of Christian nationalism, it almost doesn't seem like it's looking for the government to push quote unquote, the furtherance of your religious beliefs, it seems as though it's trying to use the government to some degree to bring in the political notion of what it means to really determine who the winners and the losers are. You know, it's one of these type of things where you're trying to classify a group so you can either put them in the group of winners or put them in the group of losers. And that seems to be more of the divide and conquer as opposed to just simply trying to promote one's religious belief. Or am I missing something here?
No, I think you're exactly right. It'd be hard to argue that what we understand of Christian nationalism, right, and which is, by the way, a second order term, right? Andrew Whitehead, I think, was the first one to came up with this. Right, it's a scholarly term that's applied that we say, but it's hard to know what that means, right? There's different connotations of it. But properly understood, right, Christian nationalism is the way of making the idea that not just America is founded as a Christian nation, and then God providentially moves America through. But America should now be a Christian nation, should impose, I'm going to scare quote a lot of this, quote unquote, Christian ideas, Christian laws, Christian cultures upon people. And if you don't go along with that, if you aren't quote unquote Christian in a very specific way that often has little to do with the larger Christian tradition, then you aren't a real, and the real is not usually you're not a real Christian, you're not a real American. You're not really patriotic. You hate this country. You're going to destroy this country. It's power and it's fear. And it's not just from a personal view, though it is from my own personal view and faith. I just don't think it has a whole lot to do with Christianity. That's not new. That's not revolutionary. We've done this in America for a long time and throughout the world, right? But it's a matter of, it's far more of power politics than it has anything to do with theology or doctrine or ritual. Those things aren't really involved. It's policy and power, and it's called Christian, so you can be a good American. That's the formulation that is just, to me, it's anathema to the gospel.
And going back to what you said, Orlin, if you're making it count who wins, who loses, it matters who wins, because who wins is going to shape, almost dictate the policies. They are going to dictate the power.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues we're trying to deal with is the idea that if you want to talk about loving your fellow man, then for some reason the viewpoint is, well, that's only Christian. But there's probably not a religion in the world that doesn't have something in it that synonymously says you should love your fellow man. And therefore, when you decide to take just one aspect of it, I think that's where the confusion is, you know. And Andre, when you're in an environment where you have multiple different religions, you know, you're of the Jewish faith and someone's telling you that we're all Christians, then you've totally missed what they believe in.
Mm-hmm. You know, and really it's on a fundamental level. It's not just the blend of religion's influence in politics that's causing, this reaction, but also, as I mentioned, the tone in which it's being carried out. And as Andrew alluded to earlier, the Christian nationalist movement really was a reaction to, this kind of this idea that, the society and culture has lost its way. And so there needs to be a moral compass that to bring it back. And so as this plays out, I'll be interested to see again, how many other denominations really engage in this public relations campaign to put themselves at arm's length from the Christian nationalism movement.
I'm gonna have to let that be the last word, but I think what we're really looking at here is getting nationalism to be a focal point from a nationalist standpoint and allowing religion to be a religion from simply a religious standpoint. In the case of Frankel versus Regents of the University of California, we're starting to see an activity that's taking place in particular in the wake of the terrorist attack on Israel on October of last year. Anti-Jewish protests have emerged on many college campuses nationwide. Many of you have probably seen a lot of university professors and university presidents that have been called down to actually testify before Congress. But in this particular case in UCLA, there was an encampment that took place that was trying to, what they would enforce was called a Jew exclusion zone. Now, when you get to a point where you're starting to allow something like this to be on campus, then that begs a question. But UCLA's administration ordered police to stand down and to step aside and even assign security officers to keep those who would not agree to disavow Israel's rights to exist away from this particular area. And then we have 3 Jewish UCLA students who are now asking a federal court to hold UCLA accountable for allowing the anti-Semitic encampment checkpoints. You know, Judge Hawkins, I thought I've seen everything. I've seen cases where they have a free speech zone. Now I'm seeing where they have a zone that actually has to deal with Jew exclusion. I mean, where are we going with this? And I thought our college campuses used to be, some of the places were called the most open, but it looks like we're getting what I would call closed in and fringes, and leadership seems to be struggling in how to manage this. Or am I missing something here?
I may be missing something, but as I did the research on this case, and as I tried to find the facts of the case so that I could put it in perspective, the biases in the reports are so strong that you walk away knowing that you still don't have an objective report on what happened. The UCLA's actions, did they actually set in motion the confrontations? Did they literally create and invite a free-for-all confrontation? Because reading one set of facts, it looks like the pro-Palestinians were non-violently in their zone, sharing their freedom of speech on this issue. And then the university allowed, according to one source, that the pro-Israel group were allowed to come right up in their faces and to do their opposition. So if in fact the university facilitated creating the environment for the pro-Israel group to attack the pro-Palestinian group, that's a problem. I don't know. I'm really struggling with just the basic facts of what I use the word really happened.
Yeah, there's some background on that, and from journalistic sources that say that the university administration really was caught in a dilemma because they are there to protect the students' freedom of expression, but also the safety and security of students. And with such a powder keg of an issue, with 2 very, very emotional sides on this. The university administration had to, I think, do what they had to do, and then these sides come along, and then one side calls itself a Jewish exclusion zone, and really that's when you pull back, really what this comes down to is we've lost the ability to have civil discourse, really, and this whole idea of openness and listening and humility. And when I say humility, I really mean, it really addresses the issue of the person that I'm opposing is also my moral and intellectual equal, which actually is a very, very hard pill to swallow on such polarizing issues. But if we're really going to come down back to a civil discourse level, that's the level of humility we really need to explore.
Andre, that's exactly where my mind went as far as, as Orlin mentioned, I think, peaceful protest has really been a hallmark of college and university campuses. We've seen that over the decades and really been the impetus for a lot of positive change in our community, in our nation. And so I think, really disappointing to see where, as you said, the level of civil discourse has gone. This is where people are supposed to be learning how to engage with differing perspectives, right? And so to see this real intolerance, discrimination, there was actually violence taking place. It really doesn't bode well for where we're continuing to head in society. Again, university should be the time where we are growing and learning, and it seems like instead we're taking steps backwards.
You know, Andrew, what's kind of weird here is we're at universities where words and discussions mean something. I mean, I'm trying to understand how I could approach a security guard and say, could you show me where the Jew exclusion zone is? I'm trying to make my way there. I mean, just the mere fact that we have this phraseology that's being used, to me, automatically is just looking like this is going to incite something. And, you know, so the thought process seems to be that not only are some of these universities not understanding how to manage the idea of free speech, they're even having problems in even how you would even describe it in a way where it's not, quote unquote, fighting words before you even begin to use words.
That's right. No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I know at my university, we struggle a lot with this, right? We're a large state university in the South. There's a lot of diversity all over the place. And as all of y'all have said, right, our idea, or maybe ideal, of college and university is the place where you go, right? Your brain has almost just fully developed, right? It's a fact.
Almost.
Right? So you can deal with what we try to do, which is context and nuance, right? That's how we have deep, meaningful conversations. I don't think this is just one of those youth of America things where we shake our head. One, I'm a historian, so I know how college campuses have been for a while. This has always been an issue, but it's a matter like we talked about in the previous segment. We have a tendency to want to, people are either this or that. And in the end of that, they're not people. They're symbols of a thing that I hate, that I think is wrong, that I think is right. And these conversations aren't conversations because they're rarely about the topics and the subjects that are difficult and nuanced and involved a lot of issues. Listen, if you think the Israeli-Palestine conflict is simple, you know virtually nothing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's just fundamentally true. It's a long history. It's incredibly complex. It really is difficult if you consider and think about both sides. But that is the issue. If you think about and consider both sides. And I don't think it's as much I firmly believe this as it is, I am one of these people and we firmly believe this. I think that's where we really get into trouble. I don't know what the answer of this in university colleges. I don't think UCLA did a great job with this. I do think we have to have free speech. We have to have conversations, but we have to do it in such a way that people can have speech, right? Conversations. I don't know how this is going to play out, but it's going to be interesting because this will come up, not just this issue, but I think on college campuses as we get closer and closer in this election season.
Well, and I think, Melissa, being down on Capitol Hill and, the idea of what side you're on and the protection of certain religious groups, how Americans feel about the Jewish population, where Palestinians come into play, how you juxtapose the two. It almost seems like you can't go anywhere unless you're willing to first be clear, who am I with? Once you know who I'm with, then you might be able to help me.
I was hoping you weren't going to be pointing to Capitol Hill as the direction we should be going as far as this conversation. Absolutely. I mean, it's exactly right. You have to show your loyalty before you even are just like this situation, allowed into the room, allowed to have a voice. And so, it's frustrating, to see this happening. One of the reports that I was seeing was this is, I believe, the first judicial ruling that there has been on this situation. We know that UCLA is not the only campus where similar situations have occurred. It'll be interesting to me, sort of, if there are other legal cases, how, various jurisdictions or various districts or circuits rule. Because if you read the circuit court or the district court's language, he was very adamant, right? He referred to this as UCLA's behavior as abhorrent. So it'll be interesting to see if this is a one and done or if there'll be differing perspectives judicially.
Also, depending on who you read, there are comments about how much representation the university put forth. And it almost seems like who spoke for the other side. It's really muddy. And I think that the mud is very thick mud. And I think that, as you're saying, it's spreading like what do you call it, like a landslide. It's getting muddier and muddier out here.
Andrew, I'm gonna give you the last word on this, because what I'm finding interesting is that it's not like this is the first time issues have been happening on college campuses. We had Vietnam, we had Kent State. You would think that there would be a plan that may be in place based on things we've seen in the past. I mean, is that not what's going on at universities nowadays?
I think there are plans. I don't think they plan for this. I think that the institutional norm is generally you set up a place to hopefully, best case scenario, right, allow for education and deep thought and critical thinking, but also to protect the institution, to make sure you don't get sued, to make sure you don't get a foul of. And to be quite honest, those are difficult things. Those don't always meet together. How do you have difficult conversations in a way that no one's going to get very upset? No one else is going to come in and say, see what you're doing to the whatever, right? That's where university administrators are in right now. They're incredibly worried that no matter what they do, they will be wrong. And so sometimes the answer is to, if all possible, let nothing happen.
And I'll let that be the last word, simply because we're at a point in time where it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to have somebody that's going to be upset. And as a result, we just hope that we can protect all of us on campuses and everywhere else as we try to have civil discourse. Judge Hawkins, tell me something I don't know.
I keep wondering why everybody refers to the Pew Research Center as being the end all. And I discovered that Pew actually is the name of the founding fathers, and Pew was the owner of Sun Oil that became Sunoco, and that his generosity extended to his children, and that's how the Pew Charitable Trust began.
Wow, didn't know that. Andre, tell me something I don't know.
UCLA was actually founded in 1919, making it the only leading research institution in the United States that was started in the 20th century. They also received the most college applications of any university in the world. Each year they break a new record.
Wow. Andrew, tell me something I don't know.
I just looked this up last weekend, trying to figure out all these demographic changes and political movements. So it turns out that when America was founded, at the founding of the Republic, just under 5% of Americans lived in what we would call an urban environment. Today, it is over 80%, and that is after they have continuously doubled the criteria to be counted as urban. We are now an urban nation, and no longer really a rural one.
Wow. Melissa, tell me something I don't know.
Sure. Well, we mentioned Baptist pioneer John Leland earlier. I was looking at some of his quotes, and I've got to share this one, Orlin. Leland said, "Government has no more to do with the religious opinions of men than it has to do with the principles of mathematics."
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that, and appreciate all of our conversation today. Thanks again for you being here. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. Just remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.